school for psychology because I always did and still do love people. That's important to the story. The job was hard sometimes, especially in winter and during heat waves, but I liked it, and I got to know a lot of the customers. I often delivered to the same people on a weekly basis because mostly families and couples would order pizza as part of their weekend dinner plans. My favorite house that I delivered to was this really sweet older couple. I'll call them Doris and Henry. Those aren't their real names, but they were probably in their mid-70s or so. They ordered a medium pizza, breadsticks, salad, and then a bottle of Coke every single Friday night. The only time that they didn't order was like right before Christmas or on holidays, etc. etc. I need to work on that. Doris would bake Christmas cookies every year. I only did this job for 3 years, but she would actually give me a huge tin of the homemade sugar cookies for those 3 years in a row, along with a card. Pretty cool. Not many people give their delivery drivers cookies and Christmas cards. Very sweet. The last year that I worked for the restaurant, I delivered to them at the end of June. I dropped the pizza off, and we chatted for just a couple of minutes as we always did. They were heading out of the city to visit their daughter for a little beachside early summer vacation. I wished them a great vacation, a safe flight, and told them that I would see them 2 weeks later when they got back. I even joked with them not to cheat on the restaurant by getting pizza in another city. So, the weekend goes by as normal. I worked on Monday night, as I always did, and then I had classes the rest of the week. The weekend rolls around again, and on Friday night, I am super busy delivering food. Near closing time, I get a delivery notice for Doris and Henry's house. First thing I noticed was that it was much later than they normally ordered. Plus, and not a crime, but it was just something that stood out. They weren't supposed to be back yet from vacation. And they had changed their order to something completely different. No pizza. Instead, it was a large but single serving of lasagna. My heart immediately sank, and I thought the worst. Had one of them passed away while on vacation? That might explain why the single order of food and why they had come home early. Oh no. Regardless, I could not help myself. I asked this guy where Elizabeth and Frank were. Those were the actual names that I said. And yes, I was trying to test him to see if he would correct me on their names. He didn't. He said, quote, "My mom is having heart surgery and I am watching the house. Not that it's any of your business." Unquote. That's not good. He then closed the door, ending our conversation. Since psychology is the field that I did end up going into, I like to think that even before my accumulated experience of working with people, I have always been good with them. I knew as soon as he opened the door, something was off. But obviously, the lie that he had just told me everything that I needed to know. This was before cell phones. So I calmly got back in my car. I drove to the police station and I explained to them what had just happened. I told them that I didn't have any solid proof or anything, but the couple that I delivered to were not supposed to be there, and I was pretty certain that something fishy was going on. Yeah. Luckily, Henry had been an active volunteer in the city before retiring, so the police not only had his full name, but they also had his daughter's contact information, who was one of his emergency contacts. They called her, got a hold of Doris and Henry, and just as I had suspected, there should not have been anybody in their home at that moment. With permission, police went there, opened the door, and found the guy who had broken in through an upstairs window, and he was making himself nice and comfortable. I like to imagine that he was just sitting down in the TV room, just about ready to dig into the lasagna when police interrupted him. He was some sort of squatter, but nobody knew how he had known that Doris and Henry would be gone for 2 weeks. The information must have just gotten passed around to neighbors in the townhouse lot and somehow reached the wrong person. Or maybe he had been watching. I have no idea, but I am really glad that he was not there when they got home. Thanks for reading. Moral of the story, I guess, is to always trust your gut. say you're a hero for solving that and getting the guy out. Very, very scary. Yeah, good for you for trusting your gut. Okay. I switched back to a different honey, which is I can't remember the name, but it's like a Canadian amber honey. Oh, it's so good. The other honey that I was using was just like pure sweet, like 100% sweet with like no other notes of any flavor. But this one, I can't explain it. It tastes like, the only way I can explain it is that it actually tastes like amber, which I know sounds weird. It tastes like a tree. It's so good. Okay. Hi, Leah. Hi. This is not my own story, but it's something that my older brother experienced. He does HVAC for a living, installing heat, air conditioners, etc. This is only one of the many unexplainable things that he has experienced, but the one that has stuck with me the most. He had a job to do at this company, and a man named George let him into the building. He took him downstairs to what he needed to work on, explained the issue with the system, and then told him that he'd be around if he needed anything or if he had any questions. Well, the owner of the company heard my brother down in the basement, went down there and asked him how he got down there, because you needed a key to open the door, and the owner was the only one there. My brother explained that George let him in and took him down to the basement. The owner went pale. To that he replied, quote, "George has been dead for years," unquote. From M. That is beyond creepy. I believe in ghosts as much as the next person, but there is something like not sinister, but there is something very overtly creepy about a ghost being able to like manipulate physical things. I don't like that. And just a quick little side note. searching my memory for an experience that I cannot explain, and I thought I didn't have any. Until I remembered this. If it wasn't for my mom and brother remembering this occurrence, I would have thought that it was a dream. a streetlight with a bicycle, looking around and seemingly lost. Eventually, he moved on. About 2 miles from our house was a group home for people with developmental delays, and my parents theorized that the man was likely a resident who had left in the middle of the night and gotten lost. A lot of people mistook our dead-end street for a through street, and it was easy to lose your sense of direction, especially in the dark. It was likely that the man meant no harm and was disoriented, but it was still unnerving for someone to ring your doorbell in the middle of the night. My parents always locked the doors for a reason, even in a small town. If he was from the group home, then that's really sad. Really hope he was able to find his way back. But still, it doesn't take away from how scary that is. Having someone knock on your door at a weird hour is very, very spooky. Yeah, I don't like that at all. The second story happened several years later when I was in high school. Our house didn't have central AC, so at night we would open our windows to let cool air come in through the screens. This was upstate New York, so summer nights would be nice and cool. One night we heard someone or something shrieking out in the night. It stopped after a few minutes, and my parents dismissed it as an animal. It still freaked me out, so my brother and I did some research, and we found that foxes can let out screams during the night when mating or communicating. Our cul-de-sac was surrounded by woods, so it wouldn't be unusual for a fox to be around. The weird thing is, we had lived on the street for 10 years at that point and had never heard a fox before. But there's a first time for everything, I suppose. Sincerely, Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth. was working on an old heritage property in the middle of England. It was 2018. We were in the middle of a heat wave, but mild breeze, and it was around 8:30 a.m. I'd cleared the property with the custodian, and he had assured me that it was closed to the public for the next 5 days, and he headed off. I was the only one on site. I was waiting for my guys to arrive, so I just set up the work area. Just finished setting up all my tools in the cellar to get to work on replacing a 500-year-old oak beam that was sagging. I heard a door slam. The stereotypical creak and slam latch clunk of a horror movie door. So I shouted up. No answer. Then I went up in case someone had turned up and maybe gone the wrong way. No one was around, except a door was shut. It had a latch that it clipped onto the wall with, so I assumed that it was the wind. I re-clipped it, and I walked back towards the cellar, and I heard footsteps above me. So at this point, I called the custodian, thinking that maybe he had come back. He was at home. So I walk up the stairs into the loft, and there is no one up there. It's basically just an open floor upstairs with 3 gambrel bents in a line. Completely open, no rooms, nowhere for anyone to be hiding. I say to myself, alright, I must be hearing things at this point. Went back down, and I heard a set of footsteps come up the stairs from the cellar. Stone steps, like proper thuds. It got about 2 steps from the top, and then it stopped. guess maybe it wasn't a home at one time, but still weird. I oversaw the demo phase often when serving as a junior PM for ACM in New York City. One of those, you did it pretty well once, now you're the guy kind of things. We were ripping down a bunch of abandoned waterfront warehouses to make way for some new condos. Biggest part of the complex was a failed movie studio from the 60s and 70s. It was pretty much just a warehouse that had been converted to a soundstage and some offices. Abatement crews had finished the hot work, so I was doing the walkthrough after hours to make sure that everything checked out and the ID'd hotspots had all been cleared. I found a door that did not show up on any plans of the site and had been exposed when the crews were clearing tar from the interior walls. I figure, F it, I might as well see what's inside. So I pop on my flashlight and I open the door. Entire room is painted red. There's moldy and stained red carpeting, and the windows have been bricked over from the inside. This is as hidden of a room as you get. There's 2 filing cabinets and a tattered couch along one wall, and the filing cabinets were full of little dossiers on people. I have no idea why that room was bricked up from both the outside and the inside, then not listed on any plans. But that place was 100,000% bad vibes. The dossier had a few names, a few dates, and corresponding photos, but the content did not seem like a list of films that people had been in, so they didn't seem like resumes for a movie or something. That's creepy. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe. I don't know. I find hidden rooms so interesting. It's like recurring dream that I always have where I've moved into a new house and then I always end up finding hidden swinging around. Less than 6 feet away, he saw a tall, dark specter hovering just above the ground. He found himself transfixed to the spot, unable to move, drained of energy by some powerful hypnotic force that in a matter of seconds rendered him unconscious. So great was the intensity of this force that he remained like this for several minutes, or so it seemed, before the specter abruptly vanished and he slowly regained his normal faculties. Recalling the incident afterwards, he said that it was almost as if some force of terribly evil proportions had actually sought him out with the intention of doing serious harm. All I can picture in my head right now is Salem's Lot, which I read recently. It's given off very, very Salem's Lot vibes. This account was intriguing. Thornton was a sincere and logical person, and he was not the type liable to fantasy or exaggeration. His profession as an accountant by itself suggested that his interest lay in things of a logical nature. That he had seen something there seemed a little doubt. But what was especially interesting was that he had described the entity as seeking him out and actually trying to cause physical harm. An uncommon occurrence with reports of ghostly confrontations, when ghosts themselves are rarely reported as exercising any physical control over their human counterparts. It was a fair conclusion that the phenomenon was definitely malevolent by nature. Several more people were interviewed in the following weeks, but again, most of these accounts turned out to be second-hand reports or exaggerations of what by now had become an already established rumor. An exception to this, however, was one old lady who claimed that she had been frightened by a tall, dark man who floated at her from within the cemetery gates. She had been walking her dog late one night, but as she approached the gates of the cemetery, it started to howl and tried to retreat. She looked up and she saw a figure with glaring eyes staring at her. And in a matter of seconds, it promptly vanished. This account was also entered on the Society's files, but it seemed that the next step to obtaining more precise information was to visit Highgate Cemetery in daylight to check the sites of the phenomenon's reputed appearances and perhaps discover some clues that could have otherwise accounted for its presence. This visit was made by the author, who had taken a personal interest in the case, although it turned out to be disappointing as nothing significant was found. By way of a hoax, or otherwise, for both sightings. history of the black apparition. Indeed, apart from rumor and other unsubstantiated local stories, the only real evidence were the testimonies of just 2 people, and it seemed the only way to credit their accounts and thereby justify a full investigation was to spend a night in the cemetery to see if the phenomenon could be witnessed. The place where Thornton had been confronted inside the cemetery seemed an appropriate place, as it was secluded and there was no risk of being seen by anybody happening by the top gate. This was the place where the old lady had seen the entity. The date chosen was December 21st, the eve of the winter solstice, and a traditional time when potent psychic forces have easy access to the earthly plane. That the entity may be dangerous from a psychic point of view was a fact not overlooked. But I was confident that previous experiences with potentially malevolent forces would enable me to deal with any such possibility. Around 11 p.m. on the proposed night, I set off for the cemetery. It was a bitterly cold night, and the surrounding area was deserted. Walking down the narrow lane that ran alongside the cemetery, there was a sudden awareness of some alien presence. This was difficult to define, except insofar as there was a distinct impression of no longer being alone. Reaching the top gate and preparing to scale this, I decided to wait a couple of minutes with the intention of perhaps noticing some material object through the gate, such as a shadow cast by a tombstone or from a tree moving in the wind, that could have otherwise accounted for the old lady's phantom. Peering through the rusty bars of the gate, scrutinizing the darkness, objects near the gate itself lining the pathway were fairly easy to discern. But after 20 yards or so, the path disappeared into impenetrable blackness. Staring into this, perhaps due to some trick of the light, there was a distinct impression of something moving. What appeared one minute to be a definite black shape were soon dispelled when I saw two reddish eyes meeting